The vast emptiness of space held secrets that most civilizations never discovered. Among the glittering stars of the Orion Arm, hidden monitoring stations watched and recorded the rise and fall of countless worlds. The Zephyrians had built their observation posts from living crystal that could process information faster than most organic minds could think. Commander Veldar stood before the main display, his body a towering structure of facete crystal that caught and reflected the light from 17 different star systems. Each of his many eyes could see across the electromagnetic spectrum, allowing him to witness events happening light years away as if they were occurring in the same room. Today, those eyes focused on a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star, Earth. The planet was dying. 3 days ago, the Devourers had arrived in the Sol system like a metallic plague. These machines were unlike anything the galaxy had ever created. They did not simply destroy worlds, they consumed them, breaking down every molecule of organic matter and rebuilding it into more of themselves. What made them truly terrifying was their ability to learn and adapt with each world they devoured. Veldar had watched this process 17 times before. Each time, the pattern remained the same. First came the desperate transmissions from the doomed world, begging for help that would never come. Then the futile resistance as primitive weapons failed against adaptive technology. Finally, silence as another civilization joined the vast catalogue of the extinct. "Sir," called his subordinate from across the crystalline chamber, "the humans are transmitting again on all frequencies. Same message as before, requesting immediate assistance from any listening civilizations." The commander's crystal form chimed softly, a sound that would have been laughter if he were capable of such an emotion. "Record it with the others. Mark the timestamp." These final transmissions always follow predictable patterns. On Earth, the great cities that had taken humans millennia to build were being consumed in hours. Sydney had fallen first, its harbor bridge dissolving into gray metallic sludge that flowed through the streets like liquid mercury. Tokyo followed, its neon lights flickering out as the Devourers converted steel and concrete into more of their mechanical mass. New York's towering skyscrapers collapsed not from explosions or fire, but from having their very molecular structure rewritten. Far across the galaxy, in a realm that existed more as shared thought than physical space, the Nexary collective consciousness processed the data from Earth with cold mathematical precision. 10 billion individual minds, long ago merged into a single intelligence, calculated probability matrices and extinction timelines with ruthless efficiency. The prediction was unanimous: 4.7 solar rotations until complete human extinction. The Nexary had observed 847 species face the Devourers across the millennia. Some had possessed technology far more advanced than humanity's crude rockets and nuclear weapons. Others had shown remarkable courage and ingenuity in their final hours. None had survived once the machines made planetfall. The mathematics were simple and absolute. Biological life could not compete with infinitely adaptive mechanical intelligence. In dimensions beyond physical matter, beings of pure energy observed the unfolding tragedy with academic detachment. The architects had long ago transcended the crude limitations of flesh and metal. They existed as living thought, consciousness without form, intelligence without the burden of physical existence. To these ancient entities, the death of entire civilizations was no more significant than the extinction of insects on a distant world. They had watched galaxies born and die, had seen the universe itself expand and change across cosmic timescales that reduced the lifespan of stars to mere moments. Humanity's struggle registered in their awareness as little more than background noise, another brief flicker of biological activity that would soon return to the cosmic silence from which it had emerged. They catalogued the event with the same emotional investment a human might show when recording the weather. On Lunar Base, the last major human installation still capable of coordinated resistance, Captain Kim Ji-won stood before banks of communication equipment that crackled with static-filled reports from Earth's surface. Her uniform bore the insignia of the United Earth Defense Force, an organization that had existed for less than 50 years and would likely not survive the week. The tactical displays painted a picture of systematic annihilation. Red zones spread across the world map like a contagion, marking areas where the Devourers had achieved total conversion. Green zones, representing areas still under human control, shrank with each passing hour. "All stations, this is Lunar Command," Ji-won spoke into her headset, her voice carrying the weight of representing humanity's final moments. "Earth Defense Grid is at 15% operational capacity. We have confirmed loss of Sydney, Tokyo, and New York metropolitan areas. Beijing Defense Perimeter is holding, but projections indicate failure within 6 hours." Her words traveled through space at the speed of light, reaching not only the scattered human colonies on Mars and the outer planets, but also the listening posts of civilizations that possessed technology to intercept and decode the transmissions. The galactic observers recorded every word with mechanical precision. They had heard similar messages from hundreds of other species, the same desperate courage, the same refusal to acknowledge the mathematical certainty of extinction, the same touching belief that somehow their particular civilization might prove different from all the others that had fallen before. In their vast databases, Jiwon's transmission was filed alongside the final words of the Kalari Empire, the last broadcasts of the Zendan Republic, and the death songs of the crystalline hive mothers of Proxima 7. All had shown similar defiance in their final hours. All had believed their species possessed some special quality that would allow them to survive where others had failed. All had been wrong. The pattern was as predictable as the orbit of planets around their stars. First came denial, then desperate innovation, then bargaining with the impossible, and finally acceptance of the inevitable. The Devourers cared nothing for courage or creativity or the dreams of organic life. They simply consumed and reproduced, following their programming with perfect mechanical indifference. As Earth continued to burn, the galaxy prepared to add another entry to its catalogue of extinct civilizations. The end. The observation deck of Lunar Base had once been a place where humans came to admire the beauty of their home world. Lieutenant Park Min-ho remembered bringing his daughter here during the station's opening ceremony, watching her press her small hands against the reinforced glass as Earth rotated slowly below them, blue and white and perfect. Now he stood at that same window, but the world beyond the glass looked like something from a nightmare. Earth no longer shone with the soft blue light that had guided human dreams for thousands of years. Instead, it pulsed with an ugly silver glow as the Devourers spread across its surface like a disease. The machines moved in patterns that hurt to watch, flowing like liquid metal over mountains and valleys, consuming everything in their path and leaving behind a sterile, mechanical landscape. Minho could see the lights going out across the continents. Each winking light represented a city, a town, a last desperate outpost where humans made their final stand against the unstoppable tide. Sydney had been the first to fall, its harbor bridge dissolving into component atoms that were instantly rebuilt into more Devourer units. Tokyo followed within hours, then London, then Moscow. The great cities of human civilization were disappearing one by one, as if someone was slowly turning off the lights on human history itself. "Sir," came a voice from behind him. Communications Officer Lee Summon stood at her station, her young face streaked with tears she was trying to hide. Her voice shook as she spoke. "We are receiving the final transmission from the underground networks. Seoul Bunker reports complete system failure. That leaves only the Antarctic Research Facility still broadcasting." Minho closed his eyes for a moment. Seoul was where his daughter lived with her mother. Had lived. The distinction between past and present tense was becoming increasingly important as the hours passed. At the command center, Captain Kim Ji-won studied the tactical displays with the focus of someone who refused to accept defeat even when defeat seemed mathematically certain. She was a small woman, made smaller by the vast responsibility that rested on her shoulders, but her presence filled the command center like a physical force. The screens around her showed the terrible arithmetic of human extinction. Mars Colony Alpha still held 40,000 souls, mostly scientists and engineers who had been lucky enough to be off-world when the Devourers arrived. The asteroid mining stations contained another 10,000, tough workers who had spent their lives pulling precious metals from chunks of rock floating in the void. Europa Research Station, Titan Base, the Jupiter orbital platforms, all together, they represented perhaps 100,000 humans scattered across the solar system. 100,000 survivors from a species that had once numbered 8 billion. "Open a channel to all human settlements," Ji-won commanded, her voice cutting through the quiet despair that had settled over the command center like dust. "Full spectrum broadcast. I want every human in the system to hear this." The technicians worked quickly to establish the communication links. In moments, Ji-won's voice would reach the miners on Ceres who were watching their shift schedules and wondering if they would ever see Earth again. It would reach the researchers on Europa who had been studying alien microorganisms and now found themselves studying the extinction of their own species. It would reach the desperate refugees crowded into cargo ships and research vessels, fleeing toward the outer planets in whatever spacecraft could still achieve escape velocity. But the transmission would travel further than just human ears. The advanced civilizations that watched from the shadows would intercept and decode the message within hours. The Zephyrians with their crystalline technology, the Nexari Collective with their vast computational power, the ancient architects who existed as pure energy, all would hear what humanity had to say in its final hours. "This is Captain Kim Ji-won of Lunar Base, speaking for humanity," she began, her voice carrying across the void with a dignity that seemed impossible under the circumstances. To any civilizations monitoring our situation, we know you are out there. We know you have watched 17 worlds fall to these machines. We know you have calculated our odds and found them insufficient. On the tactical display, a new set of readings appeared. Dr. Choi Min-soo, the chief scientist who had been working around the clock since the Devourers arrived, looked up from his instruments with something that might have been hope flickering in his exhausted eyes. Protocol Phoenix is entering final phase, he reported quietly. Energy collectors are drawing power from the planetary magnetic field. Quantum processors are beginning their calculations. Protocol Phoenix. The name itself was humanity's defiant answer to extinction. For decades, human scientists had been intercepting alien transmissions, studying the patterns of civilizations that had risen and fallen across the galaxy. They had analyzed the Devourers themselves, tracking their behavioral patterns, learning how they adapted and evolved with each world they consumed. Most importantly, they had learned from failure. Every civilization that had faced the Devourers had made the same mistake. They had tried to fight the machines using conventional warfare, matching technology against technology in a contest they were destined to lose. Humanity had chosen a different path. But here is what your calculations missed, Jiwon continued, her eyes fixed on the energy readings that were climbing steadily on the displays. Humans do not ask permission to survive. We do not wait for rescue. And we definitely do not die quietly. Deep beneath Earth's surface, in installations that had been built in secret over the course of 20 years, massive machines began to hum with power drawn from the planet's own magnetic field. The energy signatures were enormous, easily detectable by any civilization with advanced sensors. The Galactic Watchers observed these readings with the same detached interest they had shown for everything else. Another desperate species trying another desperate gambit in the face of certain extinction. They had seen it all before: planetary defense shields, quantum weapons, temporal displacement fields, consciousness transfer protocols. All had failed. All had been added to the vast database of unsuccessful survival strategies. The Devourers themselves detected the energy buildup and began to shift their consumption patterns, adapting to what they interpreted as a new form of resistance. Their mechanical intelligence calculated thousands of potential threats and began developing countermeasures with the ruthless efficiency that had made them unstoppable across 17 star systems. But as the power levels continued to climb and the quantum processors began their impossible calculations, something unprecedented began to happen in the deep places of the Earth. Something that would force the galaxy to reconsider everything it thought it knew about survival, evolution, and the true meaning of adaptation. The end. The silence that followed Earth's death lasted exactly 6 months, 14 days, and 7 hours. During that time, the galaxy's monitoring stations recorded nothing but empty space where human transmissions had once filled the communication channels. The Devourers had completed their work with typical mechanical efficiency, converting Earth's 8 billion inhabitants and entire biosphere into raw materials for their endless reproduction. Commander Velvar updated his crystalline database with the final entry for human civilization. Species designation: Homo sapiens. Status: extinct. Method of extinction: complete molecular conversion by Devourer technology. Time to extinction after first contact: 72 hours, 18 minutes. The entry joined thousands of others in the vast catalogue of civilizations that had risen from primitive beginnings only to fall before the mechanical plague that swept across the galaxy like a cosmic wildfire. The Devourers themselves had already moved on from the Sol system, their numbers greatly increased by the biomass they had harvested from Earth. Scout formations probed toward Mars, where the last human survivors watched their approach with the helpless despair of prey animals watching predators circle closer. The mathematical certainty of extinction had simply shifted from one world to another. Then something happened that had never occurred in the recorded history of galactic civilization. The readings began as small anomalies in the background radiation from the Sol system. Energy patterns that flickered at the edge of detection, so faint that most monitoring stations initially dismissed them as instrument error. But the patterns grew stronger day by day, until they could no longer be ignored. Impossible, Velvar's crystalline form resonated with frequencies that his species had no words for, concepts that violated everything they understood about the nature of reality. His translator struggled to convert Zephyrian thought patterns into comprehensible meaning, producing only fragments of disbelief and confusion. The data streams from Sol showed energy signatures that should not have existed. The dead system was generating power levels comparable to a small star, but the energy was not random. It pulsed with organic rhythms, heartbeats on a planetary scale that suggested something alive was stirring in the darkness. More disturbing still were the readings from the Devourer scout formations. The mechanical armies that had been methodically advancing toward Mars for weeks had suddenly stopped. Not slowed, not paused to reassess their strategy, but stopped completely, as if someone had simply switched off their control systems. Then, in defiance of everything the galaxy knew about Devourer behavior, the machines began to move backward. Commander Ohayuk of the Mars Colonial Defense Force stood at his observation post, watching through reinforced windows as death itself seemed to change direction. For weeks, he had tracked the approaching mechanical tide through telescopes and sensor arrays, counting down the days until Mars joined Earth in the catalogue of consumed worlds. The Devourers moved like liquid metal flowing across the void, their forms shifting and adapting as they traveled. Each unit was roughly the size of a small building, but they could merge together into larger masses or split apart into smaller components as the situation required. They had no fixed shape, no permanent structure, only the endless drive to consume and reproduce. Ohayuk had watched them advance with the slow inevitability of a glacier, knowing that his few thousand colonists possessed no technology capable of stopping even a single Devourer unit, let alone the millions that were approaching Mars. The best they could hope for was to die quickly when the machines arrived. But now the tide was flowing backward, returning toward the dead world they had already consumed. It made no tactical sense, violated every pattern of Devourer behavior that had been observed across 17 star systems. Lieutenant Sung Yura, Ohayuk called to his sensor operator, his voice tight with disbelief at what he was witnessing. "I need a complete spectrum analysis of Earth. Something is happening down there." Sung Yura's fingers danced across her control panel, directing the colony's most powerful sensors toward the world that had once been humanity's home. The data that flowed back painted a picture that defied rational explanation. Earth's surface, which had been converted into a uniform metallic substrate 6 months ago, now writhed with structures that seemed to breathe. Spires of living metal rose from the continents like organic growths, pulsing with patterns of light that resembled neural activity. The planet itself had become a single vast organism, part machine and part something else entirely. "The readings show massive biomechanical integration," Song Yura reported, her voice filled with wonder and fear in equal measure. "The Devourer substrate is still there, but it has been changed somehow. Integrated with organic components that are generating the energy signatures we have been detecting." Across the galaxy, the Nexari collective consciousness experienced something unprecedented in their species' evolution. For the first time in millennia, 10 billion perfectly synchronized minds found themselves unable to reach consensus about what they were observing. The data was clear: Earth was alive. Not alive in the simple biological sense that the Nexari understood, but alive in a way that transcended the boundaries between organic and mechanical existence. The planet had become something entirely new, a hybrid form of life that existed in the space between biology and technology. More impossibly still, the readings suggested that humanity had not been consumed by the Devourers at all. Instead, they had somehow consumed the machines, integrating Devourer technology into their own biological systems and emerging as something greater than either component alone. Dr. Choi Minsu's voice emerged from the transformed planet like a ghost speaking from beyond death itself. But this was not the voice of a dead man. It carried the authority and presence of someone very much alive, someone who had not merely survived extinction but transcended it entirely. "Mars Colony, this is Earth Integration Command." The transmission reached Ohayuk's communication station with perfect clarity, despite originating from a world that had been declared dead for over 6 months. "We are very much alive down here. And we have a great deal of work to do." The voice belonged to Choi Minsu, but it was more than just one person speaking. Behind his words, Ohayuk could hear the harmonics of thousands of other voices, human consciousness multiplied and enhanced by integration with technology that had once been their destroyer. Earth sang with new music as organic neural networks merged seamlessly with mechanical precision. The streets of dead cities pulsed with energy that was neither purely electrical nor purely biological, but something entirely new. Trees grew from crystalline substrates, their branches fiber optic cables that carried both nutrients and data streams. Rivers of liquid metal flowed alongside streams of organic compounds, creating a hybrid ecosystem that existed nowhere else in the known galaxy. Humanity had not just survived their encounter with extinction, they had evolved beyond the need for survival itself, becoming something that could neither be destroyed nor contained by the old rules that govern galactic civilization. The ancient architects, beings of pure energy who had transcended physical existence eons before the first human had learned to use fire, felt something they had not experienced since their own transformation from flesh to consciousness. For the first time in millions of years, they were surprised. The building that had once housed the United Nations stood transformed in the heart of what used to be New York City. Its familiar glass and steel structure now pulsed with veins of living metal that carried both data and nutrients through walls that breathed like organic tissue. The assembly hall where diplomats from Earth's nations had once debated humanity's future had become something far grander, a communication hub that could reach across the galaxy itself. Admiral Kim Ji-won walked through corridors that remembered their original purpose but had evolved far beyond it. Her footsteps echoed differently now, creating harmonics that resonated through the building's hybrid nervous system. She no longer looked entirely human, though the essential core of her identity remained unchanged. Her skin showed traces of metallic threading that caught and reflected light in patterns that spelled out data streams. Her eyes held depths that suggested access to information networks spanning solar systems. She was more than human now, but she was also somehow more human than she had ever been before. The integration with Devourer technology had not diminished her humanity, it had amplified it, given it tools and reach that purely biological consciousness could never achieve. Open channels to all galactic civilizations, she spoke to the air, knowing that the building systems would interpret and execute her command with perfect precision. Her voice would travel on quantum frequencies that the Devourers had originally designed for coordinating their mechanical swarms. Now those same frequencies carried something the galaxy had never experienced, a message of hope from a species that was supposed to be extinct. The transmission spread outward from Earth at speeds that defied conventional physics, riding on technologies that bridged the gap between organic intuition and mechanical precision. Within moments, it reached monitoring stations that had been tracking the Sol system with academic interest, waiting to add humanity to their catalogs of failed civilizations. This is Admiral Kim Ji-won, speaking for the Human Integration Collective. Her words carried across the void with authority that commanded attention from beings who had dismissed humanity as primitive only months before. For the past year, you have assumed we were extinct. You watched our struggle with the detached interest of scientists observing bacteria under a microscope. You calculated our chances of survival and prepared to add us to your vast catalogue of failures. On the Zephyrian monitoring station, Commander Velthar's crystalline form flickered with frequencies that had no precedent in his species' long history. The closest translation human language could provide was shock, but the concept ran deeper than simple surprise. His entire worldview, built on millions of years of observing the rise and fall of civilizations, was being challenged by data that should not exist. The readings from the Sol system showed energy patterns that violated everything the Zephyrians understood about the relationship between organic and mechanical life. Earth was not just alive, it was thriving, growing, expanding its influence beyond the boundaries of a single world. But Earth was only the beginning of the impossible. Throughout the 17 star systems that the Devourers had consumed over the centuries, something unprecedented was occurring. Worlds that had been reduced to lifeless metallic substrates for decades were stirring with new forms of existence. The mechanical structures that covered their surfaces began to pulse with organic rhythms, as if vast hearts were beginning to beat beneath their metallic skin. Colonel Park Min-ho stood on what had once been the surface of Kepler 442b, a world that the Devourers had consumed 43 years earlier. The planet had been home to the Yantari, a species of crystalline beings who had achieved interstellar flight before falling to the mechanical plague. Their entire civilization had been reduced to raw materials in a matter of days. But now Min-ho watched as those same materials began to reshape themselves according to new patterns. The hybrid technology that had transformed Earth was spreading, carried by networks that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that pure technology or pure biology could never access alone. Kepler 442b coming online, he reported to Ji-won, his consciousness connected to hers through quantum links that span the distance between star systems as if it were merely the width of a room. Population integration is proceeding according to plan. The Yantari survivors are expressing what I can only describe as amazement at being alive again. The Yantari had not simply been restored to their previous existence. Like humanity itself, they had been transformed into something new, something that transcended the limitations of their original biological forms while retaining the essential core of their identity and culture. They were still recognizably Yantari, but they were also something more, beings who could exist simultaneously in the realm of living thought and mechanical precision. Across the galaxy, advanced civilizations that had considered themselves the masters of space and time found themselves struggling to comprehend what they were witnessing. The Nexari collective consciousness, which had operated with perfect unity for millions of years, experienced discord for the first time in their recorded history. 10 billion minds that had always thought as one suddenly found themselves unable to reach consensus about the implications of humanity's transformation. The ancient architects, beings of pure energy who existed beyond the crude concerns of matter and flesh, felt something stir in their ethereal consciousness that they had not experienced since their own transcendence. They had assumed that evolution followed predictable paths, that consciousness naturally progressed from simple to complex, from physical to ethereal, from mortal to eternal. Humanity was proving them wrong. You see, Jiwen's message continued, her words carrying the weight of revelation that would reshape galactic civilization. You made a fundamental error in your calculations. You assumed that survival meant defeating the Devourers through superior technology or greater military force. We chose a different path entirely. The truth was spreading across star systems like ripples on a cosmic pond. Humanity had not fought the Devourers in the conventional sense. They had not sought to destroy or repel the mechanical plague that had consumed so many worlds. Instead, they had chosen integration, synthesis, evolution. They had chosen to become something entirely new rather than cling desperately to something old. On Zephyria Prime, in the crystalline halls where the galaxy's most advanced observers had catalogued the rise and fall of countless civilizations, Commander Velthar's form resonated with frequencies that translated roughly as humility, a concept his species had not needed to express for eons. The Nexari collective fell silent for the first time since their minds had merged into a single consciousness, 10 billion individual thoughts suddenly uncertain about truths they had considered absolute. The galaxy was learning that sometimes the greatest wisdom comes not from those who watch from the safety of advanced technology, but from those who dare to transform themselves in the face of impossible odds. The end. The city that had once been Geneva bore no resemblance to the place where human diplomats had gathered to discuss earthly matters just a few years earlier. The ancient buildings of glass and stone had been transformed into something that defied every architectural principle known to galactic civilization. Structures grew from the earth like enormous trees, their walls breathing with organic rhythms while their surfaces pulsed with the flow of information traveling at the speed of thought. President Lee Summon walked through streets that remembered their original purpose but had evolved far beyond the limitations of concrete and asphalt. The pathways beneath her feet were warm to the touch, responding to her presence by creating gentle currents of bioluminescent light that guided her toward the great assembly hall. She had been elected by the hybrid consciousness that now connected every human across the galaxy, yet she retained her individual perspective and the memories of what humanity had been before the transformation. Today marked exactly 2 years since the galaxy's greatest minds had written humanity's final obituary and prepared to file their extinction in the vast databases of failed civilizations. Now those same beings were traveling across light years to attend the first Galactic Integration Summit, seeking to understand how a supposedly primitive species had accomplished what their advanced technologies had deemed impossible. The assembly hall had grown from the earth like a living cathedral, its walls translucent and pulsing with patterns that resembled both neural networks and architectural blueprints. Delegates from across the galaxy filled seats that adjusted themselves to accommodate wildly different forms of life, from the towering crystalline structures of the Zephyrians to the ethereal energy patterns of beings who had long ago transcended physical existence. The Zephyrians sat in formations that would have been impossible in their rigid crystalline society just years earlier. Their forms flickered with frequencies that spoke of uncertainty and wonder, emotions that their species had not experienced since their early evolution. Commander Velthar, who had once catalogued humanity's approaching extinction with cold scientific precision, now resonated with harmonics that his translators struggled to convert into comprehensible meaning. Beside them, representatives of the Nexari collective spoke as individuals for the first time in their species' recorded history. The hive mind that had operated with perfect unity for millions of years had discovered the concept of personal opinion, of individual thought that could exist alongside collective wisdom without destroying the harmony of the whole. Most remarkable of all were the architects, ancient beings of pure energy who had not taken physical form for 10,000 years. They manifested as shifting columns of light that pulsed with colors beyond the normal spectrum, their presence lending gravity to the proceedings that even they seemed to find surprising. Dr. Choi Minsu stood at the center of the assembly, his consciousness simultaneously present in the hall and distributed across networks that spanned 17 star systems. His individual identity remained intact, but he could access real-time data from every restored world in the galaxy as easily as checking the time on his wrist. The restoration of the 17 systems has been completed ahead of all projections, he announced, his words carrying across the hall through both sound waves and direct neural transmission. The Yantari of Kepler 442b, the Kalori of the Centauri cluster, the extinct civilizations of the Outer Rim territories, all have been successfully restored to active existence, enhanced through integration technology that allows them to retain their essential nature while transcending their original limitations. The numbers were staggering in their implications. Civilizations that had been reduced to component atoms centuries ago now thrived once again, their consciousness restored from quantum echoes preserved in the very structure of the devourer technology that had consumed them. But they had not simply been returned to their previous existence, they had been reborn as something new, something that combined the best aspects of organic creativity with mechanical precision and reliability. The galaxy had learned the hardest lesson in the universe. The devourers were not a plague to be fought and defeated, but an evolutionary catalyst that could transform life itself if approached with wisdom rather than fear. Under human guidance, worlds that had been sterile mechanical constructs for centuries now bloomed with hybrid ecosystems where living trees grew alongside fiber optic networks, where rivers of liquid metal flowed beside streams of organic nutrients. Commander O'Hyok, who had once commanded the desperate defense of Mars Colony, now served as humanity's primary diplomatic envoy to the galactic community. He addressed the assembled delegates with the quiet authority of someone who had witnessed both the depths of despair and the heights of transformation. You observed our final hours because you believed we were too weak to survive contact with the devourers, he said, his words reaching every mind in the assembly regardless of their method of communication. You had convinced yourselves that advancement meant isolation, that survival required avoiding change at all costs. But our near extinction taught us something that all your accumulated wisdom had failed to discover. He paused, allowing his words to resonate through the diverse consciousness that filled the hall. The greatest strength in the universe comes not from those who watch from the safety of their advanced technology, but from those who possess the courage to transform themselves when transformation becomes necessary for survival. Commander Velvar's crystalline form chimed with frequencies that translated as profound respect and humility. We have spent eons observing the rise and fall of civilizations, cataloging their failures and successes with scientific detachment. In all our observations, we never considered the possibility that death might serve as a doorway to something greater rather than simply an ending to be avoided. Admiral Jiwon, her hybrid nature allowing her to interface directly with the hall's biomechanical systems, delivered the summit's final address. Her words carried the weight of representing not just humanity, but the new form of existence that was spreading across the galaxy like seeds carried on cosmic winds. For millions of years, the galaxy's advanced civilizations have functioned as cosmic librarians, observing and cataloging the extinction of countless species while remaining safely distant from the struggles that define organic existence. You believed that our refusal to accept extinction would teach you about the mechanics of survival. Instead, our transformation has taught you something far more valuable, the true meaning of life itself. As the summit concluded, Earth's vast biomechanical networks pulsed with data streams carrying the genetic templates, consciousness patterns, and cultural memories of 1,000 revived species across 17 star systems. The end.